It was a typical Saturday afternoon at the community pool, the kind where you hope the water will magically whisk away your troubles. I needed to escape the sweltering summer heat and, honestly, the suffocating monotony of my life. The water was cool and inviting, offering a brief respite from the oppressive sun and, let's face it, the oppressive reality of my marriage. I was swimming leisurely, pretending I was a mermaid, or maybe a dolphin, depending on my mood, when I noticed him for the first time. Tall, muscular, and exuding a confidence that screamed, "I don't have to try hard to get what I want." Our eyes met briefly, and I swear my heart did a weird flip. Great, just what I needed, a flutter in my stomach from a stranger. Because why not add a dash of guilt to my summer cocktail? Floating near the shallow end, trying to look casual and not like I was having a midlife crisis, I saw him approach me. His smile was warm, his eyes intense, and suddenly the pool felt a lot hotter. "Hi, I'm Alex," he said, voice smooth like he'd practiced it in the mirror. We exchanged small talk about the weather and the pool, you know, the riveting stuff. But there was something unspoken in the air, a tension that made my skin tingle. I learned he lived nearby and was a regular at the pool. Just my luck, right? His presence was magnetic, and I was drawn to him like a moth to a flame, or maybe a drowning woman to a lifeguard. I couldn't explain it, but I wasn't in a hurry to. Our conversation grew more personal, not the awkward small talk, but the kind that makes you forget time. Alex was charming, his words carefully chosen to keep me hanging on. He spoke about his work, his travels, and his passion for swimming. I found myself sharing bits about my life, my job, and, oh joy, my strained marriage. That little tidbit seemed to spark his interest more than anything else. His probing questions made me feel seen and understood, a novelty I hadn't experienced in a long while. As the sun began to set and the pool started to empty, Alex suggested we swim a few laps together. I hesitated, but his persuasive smile did its job. We swam side by side, our movements synchronized. Every brush of his arm against mine sent a jolt of electricity through my body. Who knew synchronized swimming could be so exhilarating? After our swim, we sat on the pool's edge, our legs dangling in the water like carefree teenagers. The conversation turned more intimate. Alex spoke about his past relationships, hinting at a longing for something deeper, more meaningful. I confided in him about the emotional distance between my husband and me. He listened attentively, his eyes never leaving mine. It was intoxicating, feeling like the center of someone's universe, even if just for a moment. The pool was almost deserted when Alex suggested we take a dip in the deeper end. The water was cooler there, and the setting sun cast a golden glow over everything. As we swam, his hand brushed against mine, lingering longer than necessary. There was no mistaking the intent behind his touch. My heart raced as I allowed myself to be pulled closer to him. Underwater, his fingers traced my body, exploring secret spots I had forgotten existed. Every touch sent shivers of pleasure through me, making me gasp for more. It was as if he knew exactly how to awaken desires I had long suppressed. For a moment, I forgot about my life outside the pool. There was only Alex, his touch, and the intoxicating thrill of the forbidden. The days following our encounter at the pool were a blur of anticipation and, let's be honest, a whole lot of daydreaming. I found myself returning to the pool, hoping to see Alex again, like some lovesick teenager. My mind was constantly occupied with thoughts of him, replaying our moments together in an endless loop. The guilt? Oh, it was there, lurking in the background. But that intense longing? It was front and center, impossible to ignore. On a particularly hot afternoon, the kind that makes you question all your life choices, I spotted Alex lounging by the poolside. There he was, looking like he just stepped out of a lifeguard calendar. He waved me over, his smile widening as I approached. We picked up our conversation as if no time had passed, the chemistry between us undeniable and electric. This time, there was no pretense of small talk. Our words were laced with flirtation, each glance a promise of what could be. My internal monologue was screaming, "This is a bad idea," but my body was all in. Alex suggested we meet outside the pool, a proposition that both excited and terrified me. He proposed a discreet coffee date at a nearby cafe, assuring me it would be our little secret. Despite my better judgment, I agreed. The thrill of sneaking around added to the allure, making me feel alive in ways I hadn't felt in years. It was like I was living in a cheesy romance novel, but who was I to complain? Our coffee date was a whirlwind of stolen glances and secretive smiles. Alex was attentive, hanging on my every word, making me feel cherished and desired. He reached across the table to hold my hand, his touch sending a surge of warmth through me. We talked about everything and nothing, losing track of time as we delved deeper into each other's lives. It was intoxicating, this new attention, this new feeling of being wanted. As we left the cafe, Alex suggested a walk in a nearby park. The setting sun bathed the park in a warm glow, creating a romantic backdrop for our burgeoning affair. We strolled along the paths, our hands brushing occasionally, each touch sending a jolt through my system. When we reached a secluded spot, Alex pulled me close and kissed me deeply. The world around us faded away, leaving only the two of us and the forbidden passion we shared. The kiss ignited a fire within me. We found a bench hidden from view, and Alex's hands began to explore my body with the same intensity as they had in the pool. Every touch was a promise of what was to come, each caress deepening my desire. I knew what we were doing was wrong, but in that moment, it felt like the only right thing in the world. My usual moral compass was taking a break, apparently. As the evening drew to a close, Alex walked me to my car. He kissed me again, a lingering kiss that left me breathless. "Until next time," he whispered, his eyes locking with mine. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing with thoughts of him. I knew I was crossing a line, but I couldn't bring myself to stop. The thrill of the affair was too intoxicating to resist, and honestly, I wasn't sure I wanted to. Our clandestine meetings became more frequent, each rendezvous more daring than the last. We were like teenagers sneaking around, but with a lot more at stake. The thrill of secrecy added an extra layer of excitement to our affair. We met in secluded parks, quiet cafes, and even his apartment. Always careful, always looking over our shoulders. Who knew living on the edge could be so addictive? Alex's apartment became our sanctuary, a place where we could be ourselves without fear of judgment. It was a modest place, but it felt like a palace whenever I was there with him. Hours melted away as we explored each other's bodies, discovering new ways to bring each other pleasure. Each encounter blurred the line between fantasy and reality, making it harder to remember which life I was actually living. One afternoon, Alex surprised me with a weekend getaway. He had rented a cabin in the mountains, a secluded retreat where we could be alone. The idea of spending an entire weekend with him was both exhilarating and terrifying. I concocted a story for my husband, feeling a pang of guilt that was quickly overshadowed by excitement. Because who doesn't lie to their spouse for a weekend of forbidden romance? The cabin was everything I had imagined and more. Nestled in the woods, it offered privacy and tranquility. Alex had thought of everything, from a cozy fireplace to a stocked kitchen. We spent the weekend wrapped in each other's arms, making love by the fire, exploring the surrounding woods, and sharing intimate conversations. It was a taste of what life could be like with him, a tantalizing glimpse of a different reality. I was living a romance novel, minus the paparazzi. As our weekend came to an end, reality hit me like a ton of bricks. The thought of returning to my normal life, to my husband and the facade of a happy marriage, was almost unbearable. Alex sensed my turmoil and held me close, whispering reassurances. "We'll find a way to be together," he promised. Sweet words, but I couldn't shake the sense of impending doom. Back home, I tried to readjust to my regular routine, but everything felt different. My husband's attempts at affection felt hollow, his words meaningless. It was like I was watching my life from the outside, and it was a really boring show. My mind was constantly drifting to thoughts of Alex, to the passion and excitement he brought into my life. The guilt of my affair was a heavy burden, but the desire to be with Alex outweighed everything else. I was a moth to a very hot flame, and I didn't care if I got burned. One evening, my husband confronted me. He had noticed my distant behavior, the secretive phone calls, and the sudden absences. His accusations were laced with anger and hurt, and I felt my world crumbling around me. I denied everything, of course. What else could I do? But the seed of doubt had been planted. The fragile balance of my double life was teetering on the edge, and I knew it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. And there it was, the moment I had dreaded, but also somehow expected. My perfect little bubble was about to burst. The tension at home was unbearable. My husband was suspicious and distant, and I was constantly on edge, fearing he would discover the truth. Our conversations were strained, filled with unspoken accusations and half-hearted reassurances. The once comfortable silence between us had turned into a battleground of distrust and resentment. I couldn't decide which was worse, the quiet or the confrontation that I knew was coming. My affair with Alex continued, but the joy and excitement were tinged with a sense of impending doom. We met less frequently, always looking over our shoulders, wary of being discovered. The thrill of our secret meetings was overshadowed by the fear of getting caught, making each encounter both exhilarating and nerve-wracking. It was like walking a tightrope over a pit of crocodiles. One afternoon, my husband dropped the bombshell. He had hired a private investigator. He was tired of my evasive answers and wanted concrete proof of my infidelity. Panic set in as I realized the walls were closing in. I confided in Alex, who tried to calm me down, but the fear of being exposed was overwhelming. Our affair was no longer just a secret, it was a ticking time bomb. Any second now, it was going to blow up in my face. The private investigator followed me everywhere. I could feel his presence, a constant shadow in the background. He took pictures, made notes, and collected evidence. Every move I made was under scrutiny. Going to the grocery store felt like a covert operation, and meeting Alex was like planning a heist. I was living in a noir film, but without the cool soundtrack. The stress of being followed took its toll on me. I became paranoid, constantly looking over my shoulder. My interactions with Alex grew more strained as the reality of our situation sank in. We had to be more careful, more discreet, but the tension was eating away at the passion we once shared. Our stolen moments were now filled with fear and anxiety. What a buzzkill. One evening, while I was with Alex at his apartment, my phone rang. It was my husband. His voice was cold, demanding I come home immediately. Panic set in as I realized he must have found something. I hurriedly left Alex, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. The drive home felt like an eternity, my heart pounding with fear and guilt. If this were a movie, this would be the part where the audience yells, "Don't go in there." When I arrived home, my husband was waiting for me with a stack of photographs and a folder full of evidence. He had the investigator's report, detailing every meeting, every kiss, every intimate moment I had shared with Alex. The confrontation was explosive. My husband's anger and betrayal were palpable. I tried to explain, to apologize, but the damage was done. Our marriage was hanging by a thread, and I was the one holding the scissors. The aftermath of the confrontation was a blur of tears and accusations. My husband demanded to know everything, and I had no choice but to come clean. I told him about the loneliness, the distance between us, and how Alex had made me feel alive again. My words did little to soothe his pain. The betrayal cut too deep, and the trust we once had was shattered. It felt like watching a car crash in slow motion, knowing you're the driver. In the days that followed, my husband and I barely spoke. The house was filled with a heavy silence, the kind that precedes a storm. He moved into the guest room, and I was left to grapple with the consequences of my actions. The guilt and regret were overwhelming, but the thought of losing Alex was equally devastating. I was caught between two worlds, neither of which felt like home anymore. Talk about being stuck between a rock and a hard place. Alex and I continued to see each other, but our relationship was strained by the constant fear of discovery. We were careful, meeting in even more secluded places, but the joy and excitement were fading. The reality of our situation had cast a shadow over everything, making it hard to remember why we had started this affair in the first place. What was once a thrilling escape had turned into a suffocating trap. One day, my husband came to me with a proposition. He suggested marriage counseling, a last-ditch effort to save our relationship. I was torn. Part of me wanted to fix the broken pieces of our life together, but another part couldn't let go of Alex. I agreed to the counseling, hoping it would bring some clarity to the chaos that had become my life. Because if there's one thing I needed, it was more people digging into my messed up psyche. So, there it was. A crossroads, a decision point. Trying to navigate through the mess I had created, hoping to find some semblance of sanity on the other side. Spoiler alert. It wasn't going to be easy. Our first counseling session was awkward and painful, like ripping off a bandage that had been stuck on for years. The therapist, a middle-aged woman with a soothing voice, asked us to talk about our feelings, our grievances, and our hopes for the future. Great, Just what I needed. A guided tour through the wreckage of my life. My husband spoke first, his voice heavy with emotion as he talked about his hurt and betrayal. The weight of his words hung in the air, making it hard to breathe. Then it was my turn. I talked about the loneliness I had felt, the emotional void that had led me to Alex. It was a raw, honest conversation, one I'd been avoiding for years. But as the words spilled out, I realized we had a long way to go. This wasn't going to be a quick fix. No magic words or snap of fingers to make it all better. The sessions continued, and slowly, we began to unpack the issues in our marriage. It was like opening Pandora's box, but instead of mythical horrors, it was just our dirty laundry. The therapist helped us navigate the complex emotions, guiding us toward understanding and empathy. My husband and I started to communicate more openly, something we hadn't done in years. The process was painful, like pulling teeth, but it also brought a glimmer of hope. Maybe we weren't entirely doomed after all. Despite the progress in counseling, my feelings for Alex didn't wane. If anything, they became more confusing. I found myself caught in a whirlwind of emotions, torn between the comfort of my marriage and the passion I felt for Alex. Our secret meetings continued, but the guilt was becoming harder to bear. It was like trying to juggle knives, knowing that sooner or later, one would slip and cut deep. I knew I had to make a choice, but the thought of losing either man was unbearable. One evening, after a particularly intense counseling session, my husband and I had a breakthrough. We talked late into the night, sharing our fears and dreams. It was the first time in years that I felt a genuine connection with him. The conversation gave me hope that maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild what was broken. It wasn't a fairy tale, but it was a start. The next day, I met Alex and told him about the progress in my marriage. He was supportive, but I could see the hurt in his eyes. He asked me what this meant for us, and I had no answer. The uncertainty was painful, like a dull ache that wouldn't go away. But I knew I had to give my marriage a real chance. We decided to take a break, giving me the space to figure out what I truly wanted. Easier said than done, right? The break from Alex was both a relief and a torment. I missed him terribly, but I also felt a weight lifted from my shoulders. The constant sneaking around, the lies, the fear of getting caught, it was all exhausting. I focused on my marriage, putting all my effort into the counseling sessions and rebuilding trust with my husband. It was a slow process, like trying to glue together a shattered vase, but we were making progress, one step at a time. Just as things were starting to improve at home, I received a text from Alex. He missed me and wanted to see me one last time. The message threw me into turmoil. I had been making progress with my husband, but the thought of never seeing Alex again was too painful to bear. My heart felt like it was being torn in two. I agreed to meet him, hoping it would give me the closure I needed. Because, let's face it, closure is just a fancy word for one last fix. I met Alex in a quiet park, the same one where we had shared that first illicit kiss. The setting sun cast long shadows, mirroring the heavy mood. Seeing him again was like a punch to the gut. All the emotions I had been trying to bury came rushing back. We talked, we cried, and we kissed, one last time. It was bittersweet, a painful reminder of what could never be. As I drove home, I felt a strange sense of relief. The chapter with Alex was closing, and it was time to fully commit to rebuilding my marriage. I knew it wouldn't be easy, and there would be days when I would question my decision. But for now, I was ready to face the music and try to mend the pieces of my broken life. Because if there's one thing I had learned through all this mess, it's that you can't run away from your problems forever. They always catch up with you in the end. Meeting Alex again brought all the emotions rushing back. We met at a quiet cafe, away from prying eyes. The place was small and intimate, the kind of spot that encouraged hushed conversations and secret glances. As soon as I saw him, my heart did that annoying flip thing it always did around him. Alex looked at me with those piercing eyes, and I knew this wasn't going to be easy. The conversation was bittersweet, filled with longing and regret. Alex confessed his love for me, telling me he would wait for me, no matter how long it took. His words tore at my heart, making the decision even harder. I wanted to believe him, to get lost in the fantasy, but reality was knocking too loudly to ignore. This wasn't a rom-com, it was my life, and it was messier than a teenager's bedroom. After our meeting, I was more confused than ever. I loved Alex, but I also wanted to save my marriage. The conflict was tearing me apart, affecting every aspect of my life. I confided in the therapist, spilling my guts about the emotional chaos I was wading through. She helped me see that I needed to make a choice for myself, not out of guilt or obligation. It was a difficult realization, but it brought some clarity. Turns out, emotional clarity is just as painful as emotional chaos. One night, as my husband and I were sitting in the living room, he asked me if I still loved him. His question caught me off guard, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. But then I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the man I had fallen in love with all those years ago. He wasn't just the guy who left socks everywhere and forgot our anniversary. He was the man who held me during our worst times and laughed with me during our best. I told him the truth. That I was trying, that I wanted to love him again. It was a fragile truth, but it was a start. And let's be real, we needed all the starts we could get. I decided to end things with Alex for good. It was the hardest decision I had ever made, but I knew it was the right one. I met him one last time to say goodbye. The farewell was heart-wrenching, filled with tears and unspoken words. We parted ways, both of us knowing it was the end of something beautiful and complicated. It felt like saying goodbye to a dream I didn't want to wake up from, but knew I had to. Adulting sucks. The aftermath of the breakup was a period of mourning. I missed Alex deeply, but I threw myself into repairing my marriage. The counseling sessions became a lifeline, helping me navigate the emotional turmoil. My husband and I continued to work on our relationship, building new foundations of trust and communication. It was like trying to rebuild a house after a tornado, but brick by brick, we were making progress. Over time, the pain of losing Alex began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of peace. My husband and I were closer than we had been in years. We started to find joy in each other's company again, rediscovering the love that had once brought us together. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever is, but it was real, and it was ours. We had been through hell and back, and somehow, we were still standing. As our marriage grew stronger, I found myself thinking of Alex less often. The memories of our time together became a cherished part of my past, a reminder of the lessons I had learned about love and desire. I realized that while our affair had been a catalyst for change, it was my commitment to my marriage that ultimately brought me happiness. Funny how life works out. I had gone looking for an escape and found my way back home instead. Looking at my husband now, I saw the future we could have. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't always be pretty, but it would be ours. And that was enough for me. So here's to rebuilding, to second chances, and to the unexpected turns that life throws our way. Because sometimes, the best love stories are the ones that don't go as planned. Months passed, and the scars of the past began to heal. My husband and I reached a place of stability and mutual respect. We had faced our demons and come out stronger on the other side. The affair was no longer a looming shadow but a distant memory. We had rebuilt our life together, piece by piece, like a couple of determined masons working on a particularly tricky stone wall. One day, my husband surprised me with a weekend getaway to the same cabin in the mountains where I had spent that fateful weekend with Alex. It was his way of showing me that he had forgiven me and that we could create new, happier memories together. The gesture touched me deeply, reaffirming my decision to stay and fight for our marriage. It felt like a full-circle moment, only without the melodrama of a rom-com climax. At the cabin, we reconnected on a deeper level. We spent the days hiking and exploring, and the nights by the fire, talking and laughing. It felt like a second honeymoon, a chance to fall in love all over again. The past was behind us, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly content. Who knew the same place that had been the backdrop for my affair could also be the setting for our renewal? Our return from the cabin marked a new beginning. We continued our counseling sessions, not out of necessity, but as a way to maintain the healthy communication we had developed. Our relationship was far from perfect, but we were both committed to making it work. The affair had changed us, but it had also made us stronger. It was like upgrading from a flimsy tent to a solid, cozy cabin. I started to see the affair with Alex as a turning point in my life. It had forced me to confront my unhappiness and take action. It had taught me about the importance of honesty and communication in a relationship. Most importantly, it had shown me that love is a choice, one that requires effort and dedication every day. This wasn't something Hallmark movies prepared you for, but here we were. Life slowly returned to a sense of normalcy. My husband and I found new routines, new ways to connect and enjoy each other's company. We took up new hobbies together, planned future vacations, and looked forward to the life we were building. The pain of the past had not been forgotten, but it no longer defined us. It was a chapter, not the whole book. One evening, as we were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset, my husband took my hand and said, "We've come a long way, haven't we?" I nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for the journey we had been on. We had faced our darkest moments and emerged stronger. Our love had been tested, but it had endured. And really, that's all you can ask for, isn't it? I often thought about Alex and what he had meant to me. He had been a catalyst for change, a reminder of the passion and excitement that life could offer. But in the end, it was my husband who had stood by me, who had fought for our marriage and our future. I realized that the affair had been a part of my journey, but it was not my destination. It was like a plot twist in a novel that ultimately leads to a satisfying conclusion. With time, the memories of Alex faded, replaced by new, happier memories with my husband. Our life was not perfect, but it was ours, built on a foundation of honesty and love. I had learned that happiness is not something that happens to you, it is something you create, one day at a time. Who knew I had a knack for DIY happiness? As I looked at the man beside me, I felt a deep sense of peace. Our marriage had survived the storm, and we had come out stronger on the other side. The affair had been a painful chapter, but it had also been a turning point. We had faced our fears, our failures, and our desires, and had chosen to build a life together. Not bad for a couple who had once considered separate bedrooms. Years later, as we celebrated our anniversary, I realized how far we had come. The affair was a distant memory, a reminder of the lessons we had learned and the love we had chosen to fight for. Our marriage was a testament to our resilience and our commitment to each other. And, of course, to our stubborn refusal to give up on something worth saving. In the quiet moments of our life, I often reflected on the journey we had been on. The affair had been a part of our story, but it did not define us. It had brought us closer, forced us to confront our issues, and ultimately made us stronger. Our love had been tested, but it had endured. And that's the kind of story you don't mind telling at dinner parties. As I sat beside my husband, watching the sunset, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. We had faced our darkest moments and emerged stronger. Our love had been tested, but it had endured. The affair was a chapter in our story, but it was not the end. We had chosen each other, and that was all that mattered. In the end, I realized that love is not just about passion and excitement. It is about commitment, forgiveness, and the willingness to fight for each other. Our marriage had survived the storm, and we had come out stronger on the other side. The affair had been a painful chapter, but it had also been a turning point, a catalyst for change. And with each day, we wrote a new chapter, one filled with hope, resilience, and love. Years later, as I looked back on the affair, I saw it as a crucial part of my journey. It had forced me to confront my unhappiness and take action. It had taught me the importance of honesty and communication. Most importantly, it had shown me that love is a choice, one that requires effort and dedication every day. Who knew an illicit fling could be such an effective life coach? Our life together was not without its challenges, but we faced them together, as a team. The affair had taught us to be honest with each other, to communicate openly, and to never take each other for granted. Our relationship was stronger for it, and we were happier than we had ever been. It turns out, surviving a marital apocalypse gives you a pretty solid foundation to build on. We continued to grow together, finding new ways to connect and enjoy each other's company. We traveled, took up new hobbies, and made plans for the future. Our marriage was a partnership, built on a foundation of trust and mutual respect. The affair was a distant memory, a reminder of the lessons we had learned. It was like a bad tattoo, always there but not defining who we were. As we celebrated another anniversary, I reflected on our journey. We had faced our darkest moments and emerged stronger. Our love had been tested, but it had endured. The affair was a chapter in our story, but it was not the end. We had chosen each other, and that was all that mattered. I raised my glass to us, thinking, here's to the roller coaster we never signed up for. In the quiet moments of our life, I often thought about Alex and what he had meant to me. He had been a catalyst for change, a reminder of the passion and excitement that life could offer. But in the end, it was my husband who had stood by me, who had fought for our marriage and our future. Alex was a lesson, but my husband was my reality. And as comforting as that reality had become, it didn't have the wild ups and downs of an affair. I realized that happiness is not something that happens to you, it is something you create, one day at a time. Our marriage was a testament to our resilience and our commitment to each other. We had faced our fears, our failures, and our desires, and had chosen to build a life together. This wasn't a Hallmark movie, but it was our story, and it was perfectly imperfect. As I sat beside my husband, watching the sunset, I felt a deep sense of peace. Our marriage had survived the storm, and we had come out stronger on the other side. The affair was a chapter in our story, but it was not the end. We had chosen each other, and that was all that mattered. It was like surviving a hurricane and realizing your house, though battered, was still standing. In the end, I realized that love is not just about passion and excitement. It is about commitment, forgiveness, and the willingness to fight for each other. Our marriage had survived the storm, and we had come out stronger on the other side. The affair had been a painful chapter, but it had also been a turning point, a catalyst for change. Sometimes you need a little chaos to find clarity. Years later, as I looked back on the affair, I saw it as a crucial part of my journey. It had forced me to confront my unhappiness and take action. It had taught me the importance of honesty and communication. Most importantly, it had shown me that love is a choice, one that requires effort and dedication every day. I chuckled at the irony. The messiest part of my life had led to the most profound growth. As I held my husband's hand, I knew that our love had been tested and had endured. The affair was a chapter in our story, but it was not the end. We had chosen each other, and that was all that mattered. Our life together was not perfect, but it was real, and it was ours. And in the end, that was all that truly mattered. We had written our own story, and it was beautifully, unapologetically